I find it to be a great, interesting agency that does good work. For the last 7 years, James has been a champion of delivering customer value at the PDC by building an agency culture around Agile principles. Prior to his work at the PDC, James was Associate Director of Computing at the Evergreen State College, where he introduced Agile and specifically project management using SCRUM in 2006 after completing his SCRUM Master certification. We are really thrilled, James, that you were available and willing to share your experience with us today. I know we entertained you on an earlier COP meeting several months ago, and everyone enjoyed your comments and experience so much. So with that, please take it away.
All that buildup, now I'm nervous, but here we go. So let me do the screen sharing thing here. And that one. Here. And already, I'm not even on the first slide. There we go. Jump. I'm supposed to know this technology stuff, right? But is that working now?
Looks great. We're with you.
All right, perfect. So I'm James Gutholm from the Washington Public Disclosure Commission. I've been CIO at the PDC for going on 8 years, and before that, as Stacey said, I spent 15 years at the Evergreen State College in various roles. And I was introduced to Agile in 2006 when I got my Scrum Master certification. I'm not always sure I should share this last detail given my job, but I think it's important today to understand my perspective on computing and technology. I'm a trained oceanographer. I originally taught myself how to program in C because I realized back in the 90s that computers are really amazing tools for investigating big questions in physical systems. And don't get me wrong, I find technology fascinating, the same way I can enjoy an interesting math problem. But when it comes to getting things done, computing and technology are just a means to an end. And if we're not delivering value, then there's no point in doing it. And I'm drawn to that idea of finding the most efficient and effective way to do something well enough. And by well enough, I don't mean poorly. Sometimes well enough means extremely well, when that's what's needed. And other times well enough can be just scraping by. It should really be based on the customer need. So on to the Agile journey and what's been required to make it work. And I'll give you the TLDR, the too long didn't read version. Agile requires a culture and a commitment to a set of values. I think everything else is just mechanics, but without the values and commitment, it's likely to fail. So Agile, of course, has the English definition of being able to move or adapt and respond quickly, and the term gets thrown around a lot. It definitely does not mean just winging it. I remember a meeting at Evergreen once. Someone was talking about their desire for building an interface with the ERP, basically the financials and registration system. And someone else asked them about their plan, and their response burned in my brain. We're doing Agile, so we don't waste time on planning. There are a lot of different Agile frameworks, but as far as I know, all of them involve planning because planning is intentionally iterative. I think it's usually a lot more planning than implementing waterfall. With a plan that's at least purported to reflect reality, I think there's reluctance to modify the plan. It almost feels like failing. But when the plan is to refine the plan, it feels like success. We learned something new and that was our goal, and now let's adjust the plan. If Agile isn't just winging it, is Agile something that you can implement like a cookbook? Can you just lay out a set of processes, put someone in charge and demand that the process be followed? And as I said in the TLDR, Agile requires culture and commitment to a set of values. With those values in place, the rest can be simple mechanics. Not necessarily easy, but still deliberate and simple. The bad news, of course, is culture is hard to influence. But the good news is that people like to be successful. So an Agile culture can grow through small successes. And I like to think about two aspects of organizational culture. When we look at an organization's culture, whether we're talking about the entire agency or just a small group, work group within an agency, there's this distinction for me in what we do, our reason for being, the mission, and how we do it. The how we do it, or how we think we'd like to do it better, has to align with what we do. Being agile without a mission might produce something we could call results, but those results will be difficult to justify as the right thing without having a mission. So before I go on, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the PDC, because our mission is the source of our values, or at least the values of what we do. When we plan for the how, the choices are dictated by the what. So despite the agency name, the PDC does not handle issues of public records, not any more so than any other agency. The PDC was founded by an initiative of the people in 1972, the goal being to restore confidence in the political process and good government by shining light on money and politics. To the best of my knowledge, no other state agency was created directly by the people, and we take that really seriously. Our mission is to provide a means for candidates, political committees to disclose their contributions and expenditures, who gave, how much. For candidates, office holders, and public officials, like the state CIO, to disclose their personal finances, and lobbyists and public agencies to disclose all their lobbying activity. We turn around and make all that available to the public. Basically, to make sure there's transparency in the political process by providing the public with tools like our website and open data access to the more than 7 million records we make available. We make it as easy as possible for roughly 10,000 members of the regulated community to meet their disclosure requirements by providing intuitive web applications that allow them to file their disclosure statements, by implementing efficient enforcement processes. So when someone fails to disclose, then we can enforce the law. And sometimes the violations can be really large. We have around 5,000 enforcement cases published on our website. And finally, by encouraging the public to be part of the process, because they are our greatest source of understanding customer value. So this is the agency's strategic plan. And you might notice that the 4 things I just said are the 4 pillars of the strategic plan. And it's very intentional. We're building a culture. For example, the commission has quasi-judicial authority to enforce the law, and we could do that by just making things really difficult and complicated, and then take people to hearing and fine them when they don't do what they're supposed to do. But that would defy our intention of empowering the people with information. As expressed in the plan, we help the regulated community become compliant, because that's the best way to make sure the public has timely access to information. These are the values that we judge ourselves against. So then we have these Agile values, the how we do it, that we incorporate into the culture. There have been a lot of books over the years expanding on all things Agile. And sometimes I need to remind myself that at least when we talk about software development and technology projects, Agile goes back to some very basic values and principles. And while the details of a project or environment may change, so much stays the same. It's usually enlightening for me to give myself a reminder of the things we tend to forget. So when I offered to participate today, I kind of took a risk on looking back at what for me is the foundation of Agile. And hopefully I'm not going to bore anyone to death talking about some history, but Agile has been around for a really long time. At least since the 90s and perhaps earlier. It's definitely not the new kid on the block anymore. It wasn't even in 2006 when I had my awakening. And the manifesto for Agile software development seems as applicable today as it was back then. And I'm going to talk in more details about the values of the manifesto. But first, I want to kind of give an early example of the journey. So back in 2006, I went to a free seminar on Agile project management using SCRUM, of course, to sell you on a class. I was a database administrator at the Evergreen State College, and my role was mostly supporting development of customizations to the ERP, financial systems, student registration, financial aid, and all that other stuff. And the alignment of Agile values with my desire to just make technology do things was perfect. And the timing could not have been better to ignite a tiny fire and start spreading these values. There was a failing project to create an extension to the ERP for tracking student evaluations. And if you don't know, Evergreen has narrative evaluations, not grades. And of course, an off-the-shelf ERP was oriented around grades. So a couple of developers were assigned to the project. They collected a huge number of requirements in excruciating detail on what the system should do. And everything was partially done, and nothing was even close to done. The developers were overwhelmed. They had no hope of finishing anything before the go live, which was driven by the academic cycle. This is a nice example of not letting a crisis go to waste. The developers were open to anything and easy to sell. The product owner and the stakeholders weren't aware of the problem at all. It was a really tough conversation when we had to let them know that basically nothing was going to get done. But we had a proposition. If they could choose just one thing and have that one thing done in its most minimal but still usable form, would that be worth doing? What would that one thing be? And can it provide value if there was nothing else? And of course, this is not the position we want to be in. But the stark reality got the conversation started. They would be collaborating with us to get one thing done. And if we finish that one thing in its minimal form, we'd try to do another cycle and hit another deliverable. And I can't recall how many features we were able to deliver, but none of them had all the bells and whistles initially specified. Despite that, the team produced a usable set of features that delivered value. Developers, the product owner, and the stakeholders were convinced of the process, and that tiny piece of culture was born. And the key is that we did something, but not just anything. We did something very deliberate, very well planned, and so small that we could measure the value within a matter of weeks. Even if we had accomplished nothing, all involved could say that we came together as a team to determine what was most likely to create positive value. And given the constraints of the situation, we set ourselves up for good decision-making. We did the right thing. All the better that we delivered a small win on top of a bad situation, and Agile continued to grow throughout my tenure at Evergreen. So back to talk about these values. What, according to the manifesto, is the right thing? And we're talking about values or things we value. We're not talking about processes, not just following rules, but doing what we really believe to be right. And when we come together as a team and start to believe in a shared set of values, then the team and the team members gain a position of power and moral authority that comes from taking a position of values in a shared culture. We all know what is right. And I don't want to paint a picture of a panacea, though. Do we fail to live up to our values? Of course. Is openly talking about that something we value? Most definitely. Is making deliberate choices based on good planning key to getting something done? Absolutely. Just keep in mind that I said getting something done, something specific and deliverable and measurable, and in a short enough increment to correct whatever goes wrong, or even to make a decision to abandon before we dig so deep that no one wants to admit defeat and refuses to stop digging. So the manifesto is really simple. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. We value responding to change over following a plan. Just take note that it's not that the items on the right are not important. They're just less important. And each one of these values is important enough that I think it's worth expanding on. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. If we're building a house, I think we all know the basic ingredients of a house. We can talk about the size of a bedroom, the things it contains. It's easy to come to common understanding. Ask how big the bedroom should be, and there might be a little abstract thinking like pretty big. But in the most complex case, you can show me an example, and then the tools come out, and I take some measurements, and maybe I scale it up because you have bigger furniture. And at the end of all that, it's likely to produce something that's very close to what you asked for without a lot of additional interaction. But once we start talking about abstract systems, there's always an additional layer underneath the surface, and we learn that there are additional questions only when we begin to answer the initial questions. So we value the ability to have the right conversations with the right people at the time they're needed, not at the point they're scheduled. And this is how it works in a Scrum team. So the PDC uses Scrum, and we have the typical roles: product owner, who basically orders the product through a backlog, and a Scrum master, who's kind of the guide and facilitator to the process, and a team consisting of everyone who's responsible for delivering the product. Communication within the team absolutely requires processes and tools. We have a backlog grooming meeting with the product owner, and scheduled sprint planning meetings and review meetings. And the processes and tools are important. It's just that the individuals and interactions involved are far more important. So when we decide to use tools, the goal is for the tool to increase individual contribution and interactions. At the PDC, we typically right now have 2 teams, and they work collaboratively on one product. So we keep the team sizes small. And each team consists of a product owner and 6 developers. And who are the developers? Well, this is an area where we get stuck on language at the PDC, even after 7 years. Technically, the developers are people who are responsible for delivering the product to the product owner. It doesn't matter if they write code. We've kind of settled on an arrangement where we have 4 people who write code and 2 business experts on each team. And they're all responsible for delivering the product. And admittedly, we struggle with what they call the developer coders and the developer business experts. We've kind of just settled on technical and functional, but the business experts are also highly technical, just not in the IT sense. So it's great to have tools that improve interactions, but the decision to use a tool is about how it improves interactions, not about the tool itself. And we use GitLab as a DevOps platform for project management, issue tracking, structured communication in the team, but we value the ability to interact with individuals more. And we don't dictate that all communication goes through the issue tracker just because we have it. Interaction may take the form of comments in an issue using GitLab, but more likely it's one of the coders calling one of the business experts in Teams or having an ad hoc meeting and asking them to look at something, explain a law, or even just brainstorm a wild idea. Using Teams has been a great way to do this. People don't wait until the next meeting. Everyone on the team is expected to make time as needed. Keeping in mind, the business experts all have full-time jobs doing agency business too, but everyone is part of the team. And the coders usually set up a channel meeting in Teams and actually sit in there all day long. So it's like being in a big room, and anybody can just speak up and ask a question anytime they want to. The tool is just a nice way to get work done, not the focus of the interaction. And if the process or the tool start to dictate the development by putting constraints or steering the team in a direction, then that's the wrong tool. So now let's talk about working software over comprehensive documentation. Documentation is important. It's just not valued as much as delivering working software. And it would be easy to think about this as making a prioritization between deciding, if I have 2 hours, should I write the documentation or should I deliver the software? But I think A better way to think about it is to ask what documentation is needed to deliver the software, or really to deliver a solution that meets the product owner's needs and adheres to our other values regarding testing and quality control, reuse, architecture. If the documentation is needed, it should be produced, and at the time it's needed. We find, though, that working software produces much of its own documentation. Something clear and intuitive doesn't need an instruction manual. Well-written unit tests produce working software that's easy to understand by reading the tests, not the documentation. And there's a really big difference between working, that is something that's correct, and appears to be working. Having a process of releasing early and releasing often really focuses the team on working as a priority. Nothing gets left almost done or almost correct. Again, though, tools and process are an important part of doing what's right. Our value or goal is the working product. For example, we have a formal review process. No one merges their own code into the main development branch. It gets independently reviewed. We do formal sprint reviews. And then everything runs through automated integration and is all deployed to production so that we have tools supporting the workflow that we want. And it's tool heavy. It takes a while to get set up, but at the same time, we do it because it's required to meet the goal that we're after. I think I probably got off one slide now. Oh, well, actually, I skipped a couple slides, I think. Okay, sorry for getting a little off track. There we go. When I think about customer collaboration over contract negotiation, I think about the difference between you got what you asked for and you got what you needed. In a contract negotiation, the provider has fulfilled the contract when they've met the specifications. And I don't think I've seen a contract with the requirement that the purchaser will simply make me happy with the end product. And when we're talking about highly abstract systems, it's essentially a given that we're not going to have a meeting of the minds on all the details. And we need to work towards common understanding as the pieces come together. If we consider SCRUM, basically the project is done when the product owner is satisfied with the value delivered and is ready to move on to the next project. This is certainly difficult in a fixed price bid, but it's not impossible. And we don't have fixed price bids because we have an internal development team, but we do face the same kind of pressures because instead of fixed price, we have a fixed timeline. Collaboration becomes about staying on top of what is necessary versus what is nice so that we can maintain a schedule. And there's a lot of systems for this kind of decision making or prioritization, but I'm most fond of a simple approach. The simple question, if you can't have X, should we stop right now and call it none? Is a really easy yes or no answer. And being able to ask that question is predicated on delivering value early and often, so that if we were to halt the work at any time, we would derive all the value that we paid for. It really enforces this incremental approach where we're delivering continuously into production. So what is that saying about the best laid plans? It used to be that Agile, for many people, created this impression that project management and planning took a back seat. And I think that perception has changed a lot in the last 10 plus years. But I think my real experience has been that Agile is much more planning. For us, especially the initial planning is significantly different. Initial planning is heavily focused on strategy, and the earliest iterations are about proving the strategy. If we can come up with an incremental approach that delivers customer value at every iteration, then the iterations are more focused with better and more detailed plans that then have a higher likelihood of reflecting reality. And this approach goes back to our values. Delivering customer value is about delivering something as soon as it has value and not a moment sooner either. For example, we have a campaign finance reporting application that was developed in 2008 as a desktop application written in Java. And we distribute this to the public, to the people that file with us. And we knew it was a multi-year long endeavor to replace it with a web application that could support many high demand features and improvements. And rather than trying to plan out all the phases of the work in copious detail and build a monolith, the initial plan focused on strategy so that we could incrementally replace each component of the application while improving the customer experience and delivering new features. And this was a gated project, by the way. So we absolutely had a schedule. So Scrum has a schedule, or can anyway. This kind of approach means that we're constantly planning based on what we learn. And every iteration of planning is better informed by the work that came before it. It means that the customers get an improved product almost immediately. The very first thing that we build goes into the customer's hands, sometimes in less than a sprint. As abstraction goes up, I think the necessity for these, ability to evaluate and adapt to change goes up as well. We just had an opportunity to prove this. This campaign finance reporting system includes person records that represent individuals, which are generally candidates and elected and appointed officials. And even though in the law, a person can be an entity that's not a natural person, we only accounted for natural persons in the design. And when we were examining the needs to bring together other records from another reporting system, we realized that we should have supported this broader notion of person. And I think this is what makes computers such great tools. That unlike a building, we don't need to tear down walls because the design was wrong. We just hid the natural person under a layer of abstraction because all the automated testing we have, this potentially large structural change doesn't have to be off the table. Our decision-making was really focused on the customer value, which in this case was being able to see what political organizations were also making large advertising expenditures by bringing together the data from the two systems. So how did we start the journey at the PDC? I'd love to say that it was my great force of will or some magic recipe, but part of it was simply being a wise outsider coming in with new and wonderful ideas. There's this certain grace period you get when you're new, and everything you say is taken as amazing, and never lose that opportunity when you get it. That said, I think there's nothing more powerful than finding a problem where you can gain the interest of a small number of people who are open to ideas. And these self-directed teams can grow from the bottom up. When I got to the PDC, we contracted with a vendor to do an independent assessment of how the agency was using technology. And one of the major findings was the lack of a CRM, a customer relationship management system. And emails and phone calls were how we interacted with the public. And all the support staff and compliance investigators had inboxes full of customer information. Customers are upset when stuff gets dropped and no one else on the team has any idea what's going on. It was a mess. Another finding was that technology decisions had been happening in a vacuum. The IT team just did things and then handed it to the business. Basically a train wreck. But it was an enormous gift to show that we can shift to customer-focused model driven by the business needs. The one big hole was implementing a CRM can be messy too. And this is where individuals and interactions become really important because after talking to people about what they really needed, it was clear that even the simplest CRM implementation, basically a ticketing system, would make a world of difference to the customer service team. But they weren't my first victim. And perhaps that's kind of sneaky, but I found the first, just simplest, fully hosted CRM that I thought out of the box could serve the needs of the customer service team. And then we implemented it for the IT team instead. It took 1 day to set up. And back then I had 2 staff. So the configuration was super simple, just a few custom fields, an automated satisfaction survey, and a little logo on it. And that's it. And we started using it. And then we demoed it to the customer service staff. And they were sold. They were the easiest group in the agency because they were just so horrified by how they had been doing things. And we needed a quick success. So we hatched a plan to implement for customer service in 2 sprints, just 4 weeks. All of us, the IT team and the customer service team, worked together on it. We collected stories, and every day we were reviewing and refining the configuration to figure out what was the absolute minimal we could do and give them something that was better than what they had. And it was a great success because the team was making the decisions for the first time. They realized that things could be different. And of course, success was infectious. And in less than 2 months, we had implemented the CRM across all the business lines, just meeting minimal viable requirements. And over the years, we've expanded the system as needed. And 7 years later, everyone in the agency has been part of the SCRUM team at some point or another. They not only expect us to uphold agile values, they call themselves and each other out when we stray from those values. And that is real culture happening. So why is all this stuff about values and culture so important? And what does it have to do with just getting something done? Well, a team that believes in the values of the organization can do almost anything if you give them the latitude to apply good decision making using a set of shared values about how we do it. The culture really has to recognize that success isn't measured by, did we do what you asked for? Success is measured by, did we do what is right? Usually both those things happen together, but the latter is far more important. It happens that the right thing is that you look at something and you start down a path and you realize that the right thing is to not do it. And having a culture that really is ingrained
Michelle,
in this
can you hear
idea
me now?
of saying, we don't have to do it.
Fantastic. Hello.
Is the value you need. And you have to applaud the ability to reflect critically. We need to say that we stink sometimes. We need to say it both as individuals, and we need to be able to say it as a team, and we need to be able to feel good about doing it. And then
I'm sorry, that's really awful. That's horrible. I can't even begin to imagine how awful that is.
Not on mute. James, you can unmute yourself now and keep going.
I didn't even catch that I was muted. So where did I leave off? Roughly 10 minutes ago?
No,
it was just a moment ago.
Yeah, just less than a minute.
Okay, that's good. Let's see. So did I talk about success? Success isn't always about delivering as promised.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and cover this whole slide again?
Okay, I'll give that a try.
Thank you.
Again, this kind of goes back to values and moral authority and why is all this stuff really so important? And if you have a team that believes in the values of the organization, they can really do almost anything if you just give them the latitude to apply good decision making. And that good decision making comes from also having a shared set of values about how we do it. So you're really driven by the what we do and then how we do it. And if you apply good decision making within that framework, it doesn't matter how bad you screw up. You're still doing the right things and you learn from it. You have to have a culture that really recognizes that success isn't measured by, did we do the thing that you asked for? That we measure it by, did we do what is right? And usually both of those things happen together, but doing what is right is far more important of the two. And sometimes right means saying, nope, we're not going to do this at all because it doesn't adhere to our values. And then we really have to applaud the ability to reflect critically, to say that we're horrible, and not only as a team, but as individuals as well, and be willing to say it. And it's okay. I mess up all the time, and I need to say it so that other people know that it's okay to reflect critically as well. And then finally, really Challenger itself to adhere to the team values much more than you do others even. You really have to model self-reflection. And a team that operates from a shared set of values and is willing to reflect on that honestly can rule from a position of moral authority. And this is far more powerful than any ordained authority. And I kind of throughout the presentation tossed around this phrase, moral authority, and what's that about? Well, I have a fancy title and I can rule by fiat, and I almost never do, because the reality is that people do what you say, maybe while you're watching, maybe, and then they stop the moment that you walk away, because they're more concerned with what is right than necessarily what the rule is. And think about stop signs. Who comes to a complete stop at a stop sign? Probably not a lot of people. And are we worried about what's right, or are we worried about getting caught? And that's really the difference between moral authority, is that when you speak from this position of moral authority, where a group of people agree on the same things, that is, you have shared culture, they intuitively know that what you're proposing is the thing that you all share, that it's part of your culture and it's part of the things that you agreed to. And it has enormous power, far more power than any ordained authority.
James, I'm going to jump in here and bring this section to a near close, but
I'm actually there.
Let's do it.
That's okay. So all of this is to say, just do something, but do something that's deliberate, something that is well planned and aligned with the culture and values of what we do and how we do it, and be willing to see that fail anyway.
That's amazing. Thank you, James.